Hello everyone, how are you going? And welcome to Canada and the United States bizarre border. Now I do know that the United States and Canada share the longest border in the world. It's also particularly straight, especially along the 49th parallel, and so unless you're talking about Alaska and the Great Lakes and things like that, I hardly see how it could be bizarre, but let's just find out.
Canada and the United States share the longest, straightest, possibly boringest border in the world,
Exactly.
but look closer and there's plenty of bizarreness to be found. While these sister nations get along fairly well, they both want to make it really clear whose side of the continent is whose, and they've done this by carving a 20-foot wide space along the border, all 5,500 miles of it. With the exception of the rare New England town that predates national borders or the odd airport that needed expanding, this space is the no-touching zone between the countries, and they're super serious about keeping it clear. It matters not if the no-touching zone runs through hundreds of miles of virtually uninhabited Alaskan Yukon wilderness, those border trees will not stand. Which might make you think this must be the longest, straightest deforested place in the world, but it isn't. Deforested, yes, but straight, not at all. Sure, it looks straight on a map, and the treaties establishing the lines say it's straight, but in the real world, the official border is 900 lines that zigzag from the horizontal by as much as several hundred feet.
Whoa, that is pretty darn impressive. The fact that, I mean, let's just take a couple steps back and just applaud the people that keep this thing straight. I mean, especially considering how old this border is, I'm sure now they just go through the excavators just constantly clearing it. But really, if you were out there just with a saw or even with an axe, just going out there going, okay, I guess just got to chop down all these trees, especially along the first time, now it will be fairly easy, especially as we're talking about just going through young saplings of that. You just go along, just go, yep, done, especially with all the battery tools. Where in the start, just could have been 9,000 kilometers just with your axe, basically. That would have been absolutely ridiculous. But hey, I can only imagine the people that do this, or I certainly hope that they get paid some serious dough, because to be clearing that is insanity. I mean, look, in saying that, it does also make perfect sense as to why you would want such a clear-cut line, but it's just when you're dealing with the scale of these two countries, that's when it becomes ridiculous. I mean, maybe the idea came from Europe, where you got all these small countries, or perhaps even just from the UK itself, between Scotland and Wales and things like that. But like I said, just the scale of these two is just outrageous. 9,000 kilometers just zigzagging back and forward. Oh, don't count me in for that one.
How did this happen? Well, imagine you're back in North America in the 1800s. The 49th parallel, one of those horizontal lines you see on the globe, has just been set as the national boundary, and it's your job to make it real. You are handed a compass and a ball of string and told to carefully mark off the next 2/3 of a continent. Don't mind that uncharted wilderness in your way, just keep the line straight. Yeah. Good luck with that. The men who surveyed the land did the best they could and built over 900 monuments. They're in about as straight a line as you could expect a pre-GPS civilization to make, but it's not the kind of spherical planar intersection that would bring a mathematician joy. Nonetheless, these monuments define the border, and the no-touching zone plays connect the dots with them. Oh, and while there are about 900 markers along this section of the border, there are about 8,000 in total that define the shape of the nations.
I mean, look, I just have to give them credit where credit is due. That is pretty darn impressive, just especially, like I said, before GPS and before any of those kind of technologies, just, like you said, a ball of string just going along the entire border, all 9,000 kilometers of it, just placing down over 8,000 monuments and markers. It is very, very impressive. I mean, yes, he said that a mathematician wouldn't be too happy with it, and I'm sure the Egyptians probably wouldn't be too happy with it either, but either way, it is a very laborious task that, like I said, just don't sign me up to do that one. That is outrageous. You can just see them all. It's insanity. And especially when we come back to this one and you can just see all of them. I mean, yes, the 49th parallel would have presented its own set of challenges, like trying to keep it straight for one of them, but just the level of detail throughout the rest of the country and the rest of the border is ridiculous. Both in the west and in the east, just it's insane, especially all the way up to the northern part of Alaska. No, those poor fellas, it would have been outrageous. They would have been longing for the prairies again.
Despite this massive project, Canada and the United States still have disputed territory. There's a series of islands in the Atlantic that the United States claims are part of Maine, and Canada claims are part of New Brunswick. Canada, assuming the islands are hers, built a lighthouse on one of them, and the United States, assuming the islands are hers, pretends the lighthouse doesn't exist. It's not a huge problem, as the argument is mostly over tourists who want to see puffins and fishermen who want to catch lobsters, but let's hope the disagreement gets resolved before someone finds oil under that lighthouse. Even the non-disputed territory has a few notably weird spots, such as this tick of the border upward into Canada. Zoom in and it gets stranger, as the border isn't over solid land, but runs through a lake to cut off a bit of Canada before diving back down to the US.
That is outrageous. Who were the people and the dodgy dealers that just went, no, we want just a little portion of that lake and land? Like, why? It's such an effort just to do that. You could have just gone straight across like you did with even the Great Lakes, but no, just this one lake just needed a little bloop just bloop up and over for no reason. I mean, that certainly isn't the most outrageous thing that I've heard today. The fact that the USA just pretends that this entire lighthouse that Canada built doesn't exist just so they don't have the claim to the land at the first place is just ridiculous. What are you talking about? Like, no, I just don't see it. Like, you just block so you can't see anything but the horizon? That is insanity. But he certainly did make a good point about it when he said, let's just hope the entire thing is resolved before someone finds oil under that lighthouse, which I guess someone probably would have already found oil if it was just lurking under there, and it's probably not even worth it if it is there. But I also do know that this is Canada's, and probably the USA's as well, not first rodeo with dealing with these kind of things. Even just a couple of months ago, the whiskey wars finally ended for Canada between Denmark and Canada, and even though that was a very friendly war, if you even want to call it a war, you can bet your bottom dollar that it wasn't just about the land on top. Those people just want the water and even the underground that those lands belong to.
This spot is home to about 100 Americans and is a perfect example of how border irregularities are born. Back in 1783, when the victorious Americans were negotiating with the British, who controlled what would one day be Canada, they needed a map, and this map was the best available at the time. While the East Coast looks pretty good, the wester it goes, the sparser it gets. Under negotiation was the edge of what would one day be Minnesota and Manitoba, but unfortunately that area was hidden underneath an inset on the map, so the Americans and the British were bordering blind. Seriously. They guessed the border should start from the northwestern part of this lake and go in a horizontal line until it crossed the Mississippi. Somewhere. But somewhere turned out to be nowhere, as the mighty Mississippi stopped short of that line, which left the border vague until 35 years later when a second round of negotiations established the aforementioned 49th parallel. But there was still a problem, as the lake mentioned earlier was both higher and less circular than first thought, putting its northwesterly point here, so the existing border had to jump up to meet it and then drop straight down to the 49th.
Oh my goodness. Surely if when you were just dealing with the scale of these kind of organizations and just general politics, you actually then go ahead and put the resources in to send someone out there and just do some surveying to go, hang on, let's just not guess. Let's just not guess this entire continent that we don't even know how big it is, but we know it's very, very big. Let's just send someone out there to report back to us in a couple of weeks with their findings and just going, now we can actually make an informed decision instead of just guessing and then have the entire thing just make random little errors like that. Especially when you already clearly had sent cartographers out there to that area at some point, maybe just don't use an area where you don't know what's going on. Just move the point a little bit so you can go, and make an informed decision. Or like I said, send someone out there or just remove that bit. Just get some sort of information so you're not guessing with this scale of borders. I don't get it. Well, who are these people? And once again, just to make such an outlandish statement like this, just to go, whenever we cross the river, that's when we'll call it quits, but the river never came because you just didn't even research it in the first place. I mean, I know that's a very long way for the time, and they certainly would have been on some kind of deadline, but still, for it to take 35 years for this entire thing to be fixed is just outrageous. Surely you could have sent someone out there within that next 2 years, couple of months, to send someone out there, just have a look and ride back home. That's all that needed to happen to go, the river goes nowhere. Just ditch that entire plan.
And it turns out you can't just draw a straight-ish line for hundreds of miles without causing a few more problems. One of which was luckily spotted in advance, Vancouver Island, which the 49th would have sliced through, but both sides agreed that would be dumb, so the border swoops around the island. However, next door to Vancouver Island is Point Roberts, which went unnoticed, and thus today the border blithely cuts across. It's a nice little town home to over 1,000 Americans, but has only a primary school, so its older kids have to cross international borders 4 times a day to go to school in their own state. In a pleasing symmetry, the East Coast has the exact opposite situation with a Canadian island whose only land route is a bridge from the United States. And these two aren't the only places where each country contains a bit of the other. There are several more, easily spotted in satellite photos by the no-touching zone. Regardless of if the land in question is just an uninhabited strip in the middle of a lake in the middle of nowhere, the border between these sister nations must remain clearly marked.
It is all just insanity. The fact that, I've heard of one of those before, but I haven't heard of both of them. Even the fact that these kids have to go 4 times a day, surely you would just go to high school in Canada. I don't know if that's a thing, or maybe you just catch the boat, because I believe there's a ferry service, but then, that just sounds so complicated. And then I will certainly have to do a bit more research into this guy. What is it called? Campobello Island. I don't believe I've heard anything on that, but I've definitely heard of Point Roberts before, and so yeah, both of them are just ridiculous. But it's just the fact that how do these go completely unnoticed? As it isn't like it's just in the middle of nowhere, they didn't do this. They actually had the thought at least to not chop off Vancouver Island, but it's right there. It's like a couple of k's away and they just didn't see it. Or how do you just stuff that up? And still, even to this day, how do you not just go, you know what, that's a really dumb thing. How about we just fix that? And the USA just goes, here you go. have it back, Canada, and just fixes the whole thing. I mean, that might upset a few people, and I'm sure that half the people living there just love the fact that they're unique like that, but really, it just sounds like such a pain for so many people and problems just every day dealing with them. No, it's just not worth it. I mean, in saying that, thinking about it now, there is absolutely no way the USA will ever give that back, because for goodness sake, they're contesting an island with a lighthouse on it that belongs to Canada. And so if you're contesting an island that no one cares about, what happens when people actually live there? That is, it's never going to happen, is it? And so really, these are just the absolutely perfect photos to showcase what is wrong with the entire border. I mean, yes, I understand that it had to be done simply just to be able to cover that much distance, but really, you have these bodies of water that are just the perfect borders. I mean, I don't know how the Aboriginal North Americans did it, but I know the Aboriginal Australians and their many nations just used the nature to their advantage just to showcase the borders of all these different nations. I mean, it just makes sense. You got these clearly predefined marks that nature did for you. It means you don't have to go and carve a tree line like that. But hey, if you want to go ahead and do that, it just is ridiculous. And even the fact that, like I said, why is the USA so much more barren than the Canada's area? It doesn't make sense. It's right there. What are they doing? Why are they going there and just chopping it down? Whatever. And so look, this is clearly a very unique situation, being the longest and straightest, if you want to call it that, border in the world. But it does make me wonder, how does Europe do it? Let's say between Germany and France and all these other countries, do they also just have a massive tree line? Or, yeah, like I say, I don't know how it's done, because living in Australia, we don't have any of those problems. You just have, once again, a beautiful natural border. But anyway, in saying that, I reckon I am just finally going to call it there. So thank you for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, feel free to do the algorithmic things down below. Also, if this is the first video of mine that you are watching, then make sure to go check out my other ones. Also, make sure to go check out this awesome video down in the description below. Or hey, maybe you even just want to consider subscribing so that you don't miss another one of these in the future. But all in all, have a good one and see ya.